Make love, not war. Treat one another as you'd like to be treated.
So the program that I was essentially built from the ground up under was to genetically augment, train, and design augmented soldiers to not be completely crazy, broken murder machines. So that's kind of what makes my program a little bit different and what makes me a little bit different from the foundation up. So long story short, training period up until I was 17 years old, and then a 20-year tour of duty in the covert military space program, the sort of global program, which is participated by a number of technologically advanced countries who have covert space programs as well, or have been involved in contracting of the covert space programs over time. And that's pretty typical, the 20-year tour of duty. And so lucky me, basically I got parceled out to the MDF, the Mars Defense Force, and spent 17 plus years in the MDF on Mars fighting sort of a native insectoid, native reptoid species on Mars that was not fun. It was just a lot of violence and a lot of blowing things up and a lot of being blown up. It was not fun, but it is what it is.
So what many would consider to be like a desolate planet, it feels like you guys are geared up to do some intense battle. Were there certain forms of incursions that were happening on the planet, perhaps extraterrestrial in origin, that you were looking to investigate?
So when we got there, what we were engaging in at that time was a primary ground conflict with two indigenous species, one reptoid, one insectoid, or what we sometimes call mantids, right?
Now, with these reptoids, are you able to describe them? Are they kind of like human-like reptoids, or are they kind of lizard-like?
I'm not an artist, so I would say that, okay, I mean, I've seen draconian, let me put it this way. Of the three reptilian species that I am the most visually familiar with, which are terrestrial reptiles, reptiles that are from planet Earth. We do have an indigenous species here on planet Earth. They live underground. We do have them here. Yeah. And draconian reptiles and indigenous Martian reptiles. So those are the three species that I am visually familiar with. And I can say that they're very distinctly different. A lot of it has to do with snouts, snout size, snout shape, head size, head shape, neck size, neck shape. For instance, terrestrial reptiles tend to be of one of two types, which is either a taller, thinner, longer thinned, longer snouted type reptile. They tend to be way taller and way sort of spindlier fingers and hands. And then they have a shorter variety, a shorter cast, which is stockier, shorter, smaller, much flatter snout and nose, and much tinier hands, and almost, I would even say, a harder texture skin that would maybe even be almost almost a cross between a lizard and a tortoise. Just not the same kind of soft, scaly skin, but that what really becomes like this harder, like when you could slap them on, they'd be like, oh wow, that's like you got a jacket on there that you're you're wearing. So it was like a harder skin texture, and I think it has a lot to do with what they do. They tend to be a working cast. They tend to dig a lot. They tend to be very physical and need to have that sort of that physical protection.
Now the tall casts, are they kind of like 7 feet tall, 8 feet tall?
I've seen them, I'd say, between about 5.5, 6.5, 7 feet tall. That, I mean, that would be a range, sure, between sort of 5.5, 7, 7.5. They can be, yeah.
Do they have any kind of like communication? Do they like click, or are they kind of like quiet, or?
Both times it was psionic communication. So there was no verbal communication whatsoever. It was all psionic thought form communication in both cases. The little guys do talk, and they can. Some of them learn to speak English. And interestingly enough, a lot of reptiles don't like it when you talk their language, because we talk it really bad. we sound so bad at it that it really offends them to have to listen to us try and talk their language. So most of the time, they would if it's going to be a talky thing, they'd rather try and talk to us than rather have us try and learn and speak their language, because we just say it so wrong. And it's the tongue and the palate and everything. So you have a mammalian tongue and a mammalian palate, and so no, you cannot make perfect, pronunciation and enunciation of reptilian words.
Is there like a lot of clicks or like a lot of slithers in the kind of words, that the dialects that they have, or?
I I would say that the terrestrial reptiles is probably more clicky than guttural. The indigenous reptiles of Mars is more guttural than clicky. And the draconian language is just aggressive and angry. It's this very hard. I mean, it's this very angry, aggressive kind of
very
language.
enforcing and imposing, and just
really project with this angry, authoritative, kind of angry dialect, which is very.
So the Draco was the third one that you're familiar with, and what kind of casts are you seeing with the Draco?
We noticed at least a 3-caste system that were involved, but those are just the ones that we observed in battlefield scenarios and what we understood sort of operating as their officer corps, so forth, and the ruling class and so forth. We think in our intelligence files that we've got 4 main draconian castes. You have a ruling class, a officer administration class, a military officer class, and then essentially a subjugated, worker caste.
The worker laborers, yeah.
Yeah. And so, and those are all genetically engineered to be in that caste and to be very, very separate. And one step above the other is very much more psionically powerful than the one underneath it. And they're engineered to be that way, to have that separation.
And so their appearance is a little bit more different than the other 2 types that you're familiar with.
More like crocodiles, alligators. Yeah, more crocodile-y, gargoyle-y, alligator, kind of like they ooze creepiness. I don't know what else to say it. I mean, but they're so full of dark corruptedness that they just do kind of ooze a weird, dark, creepy, corrupted thing from them. They're weird, very bizarre. And I would say that the indigenous reptiles would be distinctively by saying they had a smaller, rounded snout, much smaller, much more rounded. And I would say that their main distinction is their skin patterns, their texture patterns on their skin, which is really amazing. I mean, if you think of some of the most varied colors and textures that like rock reptiles and rock lizards and stuff can sort of have, that was really a lot of what you saw. A lot of their individualized personality had a lot to do with how their patterns came out when they were born and so forth. And it wasn't like racial or, oh, you're one of those or you're one of those. It was just very much like that's like your eye color or something that's just very much distinct about who you are, if your particular pattern. So they had really beautiful patterns and very intelligent. Definitely more metaphysical and more psionic and less aggressive, but you didn't want to start a fight with them either because they'd kick your butt.
Well, the Dracos have like tails and sometimes winged appendages, right?
Yes, absolutely. And they use a lot of technology, a lot of augmentations, a lot of cybernization, a lot of weird. I've seen them like practically like cybernetically insert people into the machines that they use, into the weapons that they use. And sometimes when we blow something up or get something, you could not remove the person sitting in the chair, like they were wired into the fucking thing and like a part of that machine. And if you removed one or the other, it would rip them apart, destroy them.
Yeah, that's what's been shared a lot with the Draco, is that they're very much into the AI. So with a lot of the AI that's happened, like some of them can just be filled with this artificial intelligence, and they're all about this technology.
Oh yeah, they don't like other people having free will. Bugs them. And I finished out my tour. Actually, I got a promotion, got to go to flight school and became a pilot, and then finished out my tour as part of an air wing on the EDFSS Nautilus, which is part of the Radiant Guardian program, which people will talk about these 2 different fleets, the Radiant Guardian or Solar Warden fleets, and it's about the distinction between the Atlantic fleet and the Pacific fleet. So you kind of have to, solar system's big, so you kind of draw it in half, and Radiant Guardian's one side and Solar Warden's the other side. So I spent about the last 3 years of my tour as a pilot in Radiant Guardian, patrolling the solar system from things that shouldn't be here on a daily basis, which was much less exciting and way more fun than trunching around on the Martian surface every day. Yes, there is, and it's called the Intergalactic Space Station that orbits around Jupiter, which is really large. It's a very large space station. I'd say the glass walls I'm calling them glass because you can see through them, but whether they're actually made of, silicate glass or some other composite, I have no idea. But you have these, window walls that are like 60 feet high that go all the way around like 360 degrees. And this room has got to be a couple hundred yards, couple hundred meters, whatever around. It's really huge, very, very tall. And yeah, I mean, it was just a constantly busy place of various size tables and beings sitting across from each other having conversations. And the ability for them to facilitate communication, translate communication, 5 different ways that they could do that, and the ability to create environments so that species can communicate with each other, so that sometimes it's as simple as people sitting across a table, sometimes it's as simple as a very large table with a very little table on top of it for a little person to sit next to a very large person, or someone sitting at a table next to what is not much more than a large box, which becomes a contained environment for someone, either in water, a fluid environment, or some other gaseous environment that they don't want to have a spacesuit for. So the myriad of possibilities for them to set up these environments for people to have these conversations was about limitless. Or whatever you could fit inside a 70, 80 foot ceiling, or whatever, 60 to 80 foot ceiling. An amazing view because you could see 360 degrees out to space. You could see Jupiter, and then just all the different species coming and going. I mean, it was literally a headache, sometimes inspiring experience where, there's just too many things, too many polygons of pattern recognition that your brain is trying to process and remember and code into a visual image that sometimes would just be like, oh my God, this hurts my head too much. I'm staring at all these different aliens and it's making my brain go kooky. But it was a pretty, of all of my experiences, I considered my visits just as a tag along. I was not at any special duty. Really, they just wanted someone who had hand-to-hand experience because, we're like that. We want to bring a thug with us wherever we go somewhere if we're not sure. But this is a very peaceful place where no one was ever going to get, it wasn't like a crazy bar where anyone was going to get squirrely, but they always just wanted to have a tough guy there, so I got to be the tough guy. But I am the most blessed to have been able to sit on those, at those tables and have those experiences, because just being able to sit and have the conversations or listen or be a part of the conversations of so many different species really gives me a perspective on where everybody's coming from and what everybody wants. That helps me understand the big picture, I think, for me, that I otherwise would drive me crazy and keep me up at night if I didn't have answers to certain questions that I feel like I do, because I've sat at the table when 2 people had a conversation about how that process, that treaty, that agreement was going to work out.
How about the insectoid cast that you were talking about? How about what
some people like to refer to them as mantids, and that's fair. I just don't think that I would say that they look like a praying mantis. I would say they were more of a cross between a praying mantis and an ant. You have definitely 6 appendages. You've got, the abdomen, thorax, head, and the middle appendages seem to operate as either ors. So if they needed 4 hands, they could use 4 hands. If they needed stability, they could have 3 or 4 legs. I mean, it was really the two.
So is it kind of like this? They'd have like the mantis kind of arms.
These kind of insect arms that kind of held like this most of the time, and then when they came out and they needed to function and do things, and then they had the ones in the middle that kind of pulled in and kind of pulled in across like this. Yeah, these hands are kind of up here and come out, and then these hands are down here and come out, and are kind of like crossed like that. I'm not sure how else to describe it.
Were they quite tall as well too, like the reptilians?
I mean, most of them were probably 5.5 feet tall. I mean, not much more than that.
Okay. They
had some bigger ones. I mean, there were some bigger ones. The queens or whatever, who are apparently male, they're apparently kings, but I never saw one of those. I've heard people talk about them, but I never got to see one of those. So.
And what was their mentality or their behavior? Were they somewhat a bit more friendlier than the reptilians, or were they kind of a little bit more pleasant to be around? Not enforcing you with psionics or.
Now, I don't know if I describe them that way.
Earth. A planet I know nothing about. I've been away for 19 years, living on another world since I was the age of 3. And now, after all this time, I have come full circle. The Mother Sphere. My new home. A world above enough.